So, hello and welcome back to yet another recap of what chapter is this? Chapter 11 of The Phoenix Unchained by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory, both wonderful authors who I appreciate their writing so much. It's funny because I haven't read any of James Mallory's books. I guess he wrote a trilogy dealing with Merlin that maybe got turned into the TV series that I haven't seen because my consumption of most visual media that's not on YouTube has gone to just about zero. I don't actually have any streaming platforms, and I haven't had cable in over 10 years, so I don't actually have TV. If it's not on YouTube, I don't really see it. Yes, I am a very boring person that way, but it makes me happy. I don't actually feel any desperate need to go out and buy a streaming platform. Every once in a while I do, but I get over it. But I do know that there was a Merlin TV, cable, some sort of series. I don't know how well it was received, but I think based on the biography that I read about James Mallory that it might have been based off of his books. They should have based it off the Mary Stuart books. Her Merlin is the best Merlin. I don't know if that ever got adapted. It probably should have. Great series. Maybe it's one I'll do a recap on at some point in the future. Although the copies of the Mary Stuart book I have, I swear the font is like that big. Speaking of font, I need to learn how to use like a word processing program because I did write notes for this chapter. My handwriting is terrible. I'm not even sure that I can read my own handwriting, but hopefully it will at least give me little prompts about what not to forget to talk about in this chapter. If you remember in the last chapter we talked about, we met Sharia. I hope I am saying her name right. It's Sharia. I think it would be a Sharia. It could be Sha'aria. I'm going to go with Sharia because it sounds musical and beautiful. We met her. She is the leader of one of the desert tribes, the Nalzindar, and she was not taken in by the mage Bisochim. Probably good for her because he seems to be sliding into the dark faster and faster and trying to bring darkness back into the world. He seems to have persuaded almost every other tribe of the Isvani to follow him, become an army. In his mind, he seems to think that this is going to protect them. Let me just say, I got a feeling it's not going to work out the way he thinks it is. Just like the fact that he thinks that he's going to bring darkness back into the world, gain immortality for himself and his dragon, and everything will be wonderful and right. The best laid plans of wild mages and men tend to go awry. But we also left off with Harrier having his very first lucid dream in his life. I've actually had some lucid dreams. They're trippy. But Harrier has had his very first lucid dream in his life. He's a little mad because this lucid dream is boring. He's in a cave. He thinks Tercel is somewhere around and somebody is calling him. At least that's what he thinks. And we pick up with chapter 11, The Caves of Ermatherilan. These names are one day going to kill me. Side tangent. I seriously think that most authors, when they write books, never think that their books are going to be read out loud, or at least didn't back in this era. Now I think most authors are hoping to get their books on like Audible or something because, it gets them a little more revenue. But or maybe it's just a me thing. The combinations of letters and trying to make the sounds actually sound right, I really think a lot of authors just bang on the keyboard and throw a few vowels in when they are naming fantasy locations and things. It's Imrathalion. I'm going to go with Imrathalion. I don't know. We're going to call it Imathalion. Imathalion. Sure, why not? Anyway, that is the title of chapter 11 that I just thoroughly butchered for everyone. I wouldn't be me if I weren't butchering things. Anyway, we're going to recap this chapter. We'll see how long it takes me to get through my notes and everything, and maybe do the next chapter, because this chapter does end on quite the cliffhanger. Although there is a very small part of me that wants to leave you guys on the cliffhanger just so I can see what everybody thinks is coming. We'll see what it ends up being. Anyway, Harrier wakes up because there is an argument in the next room from his lucid dream and promptly forgets all about it. He and Tercel get up, and if you remember, Tercel wants to immediately just sell their mule, get whatever they need to get, and head for Palasha's Vale so that he can see the elves, get his problem fixed. Harrier is a much more practical person. Harrier's like, look, the horses need a rest, they need new shoes, we need to sell the mule and probably get some sort of like maybe couple of pack mules or something. We need to be able to travel. This is going to be a very long trip, and Harrier doesn't even think that they're going to make it in a year. You know, but they head to the horse market. Harrier's still hoping that they're going to wait a few days at least before they head out. Tercel thinking they can just get everything they need and head off. Now, at the horse market, it's kind of funny because there are horses of every size, shape, and description. The boys have never seen so many. There are horses ranging from big old draft horses to riding mules to light-boned riding horses, all the way down to ponies that are specifically bred to go in and out of the mines. And Tercel thinks it's all just a giant waste. He points out to Harrier that magic could probably do everything these ponies do and do it better. And Harrier points out that there's only wild magic and Tercel, who seems to be the only high mage in existence anymore, and wild mages aren't going to expend their magic to do the things that pack ponies can do. And Harrier has very serious doubts that Tercel has enough magic to do everything that ponies could do, and it just sort of highlights the difference between the boys. Tercel is a dreamer. He kind of has his head in the clouds a lot. He's very, very trusting. Harrier is one of those people that he has to touch it. He has to feel it. He has to know everything before he really believes in it. I think at this point in the story, even though he has seen Tercel do magic many times, he doesn't really believe that there's all that much to it. And I really do like that. But it shows up throughout the entire series. You know, Harrier is very practical, very much I need to be able to grab something and really know it. Tercel is not scatterbrained. He's a very smart person, and he just tends to be a little bit more of the dreamer. You know, he is, I guess, the classic image of the scatterbrained, like, think Disney Merlin. as opposed to Mary Stuart Merlin. You know, Tercel is a little less practical. And that is brought up because, you know, Harrier and Tercel, they sell their mule. Harrier thinks that he's been gypped. Tercel, on the other hand, is just like, yeah, whatever, here. No bargaining, nothing. And that really does bring up the difference in between the boys. I mean, Harrier knows that practically he's probably going to have to plan on a much longer journey, and they're probably going to run out of money yet again. Tercel, on the other hand, is just like, ah, we'll get there somehow. And that actually makes me laugh quite a bit. Now, I did have a interesting little side note. I am going to be reading little bits of this chapter because I love the way the language is. And again, I think that just brings up the difference and the reason that Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory are such a awesome, in my opinion, writing duo together. James Mallory seems to bring the knowledge of military stuff, practical stuff, and Mercedes Lackey brings the humor and the warmth to the characters. And I say that mostly because I've read some of Mercedes Lackey's stuff on her own, and I'm recognizing bits as you read. Anyway, the boys sell their mule. Harrier thinks that it's going to be a much longer trip and they're going to need more money. Tercel doesn't really care. And as a way to stop them from getting into yet another fight, Harrier offhandedly mentions that, you know, our horses are going to take a couple of days to get shod. We need to do something. I don't want to fight with you. Why don't we go to the caves of, I'm not even going to say it, the caves of I. Because, you know, beyond the outskirts of Stereoporin, where they're getting everything done, there's nothing but wilderness. I mean, they really do need to be practical, according to Harrier. So he suggests that they go and see the caves. Tercel stops, looks at Harrier, and is like, you didn't happen to dream about caves last night, did you? And Harrier's like, maybe. They compare notes and find out that they had not the same dream, but a very similar dream, both of them in caves. Tercel says that it must be magic. He doesn't know how Harrier also received this magic, but, you know, they should definitely go check out the caves. So that's what they're going to do. They are going to go and check out the caves of I, and Tercel, being Tercel, tells Harrier all about it. He buys a tour guide to go to the caves, even though Harrier points out he's got like 10,000 tour guides in his pack at this point. And off they go. Now, the caves of Ermathelion lay a few miles outside of the city limits of Stereoporin. According to the history book that Tercel had promptly purchased in the Street of the Booksellers once they decided to go to the cave, several important battles against the Undarkened had been fought there by Kellen Nightmage himself, and the caves and most of the forest around the caves are a protected park. So I'm thinking that these caves are pretty much a state or national park if you're from the US. And that idea is definitely borne out by the fact that they get there and find out it's pretty much become just a tourist destination. They're a little bit disappointed. I mean, Tercel wasn't sure what he was expecting to see there. You know, he couldn't have been expecting to see, like, elves masked for battle and the unicorn shulkin and dragons soaring overhead. Although that was the way it was 1,000 years ago, according to everything that he's read. But they show up, and yeah, it's definitely, from the description in the chapter, it almost seems more a tourist trap mixed with a state park, because there are everybody is there. Even though it's late in the season, even though they show up late in the day, there are centaurs, brownies, surprisingly even some fawns, humans everywhere. There is a class of very bored kids that are being led around by their professor. It's actually pretty funny. So to avoid being around all of these people, at least until it's time to go down on the cave tour, the boys head over to the Temple of the Light. And Harrier's like, dude, we've been to lots of Temples of the Light. Let's get some food. They compromise, they get Harrier something to eat, and they head off to see the Temple of the Light. Because Tercel promises that this is a very different Temple of the Light, totally different than any that they've ever been to before. They walk over there and they see it, and Harrier points out to Tercel that he better not make anything glow while they're in there, referencing the fact that he made an entire roadside Temple of the Light glow a bright blue after Samara's death in honor of her. So they walk in, and most Temples of the Light are all pretty much the same, because the eternal light is considered without form, and its only symbol is the flame on the altar. So there's not a lot of decoration in most temples. There's not a lot of depictions of the natural world. But this temple is a lot different than any that the boys have ever been in before. I'm going to read from this chapter. The entire back wall of the temple, framing the high altar and the eternal flame, was made of thousands of tiny pieces of colored glass, making up a picture of a flower-filled forest. The sunlight coming in from outside flickered over the intricately set pieces, making leaves of vitreous forest that seemed to shift and move. On the paneled walls of the temple, carved unicorns danced and played amongst graceful robed figures that Harrier realized after a minute must be elves. Harrier had to wonder if the unicorns had been depicted life-sized. He had always assumed that unicorns were the same size as horses, but the ones on the wall seemed to be no larger than deer when contrasted with the elven figures. "Look up," said Tercel, and Harrier did. The dome ceiling had been painted in the likeness of a summer sky, and at its apex the likeness of a glittering black dragon wheeled in joyous flight, wreathed in a cloud of glittering butterflies. Very impressive. And I think that description very much kind of says that the elves were probably involved with making this temple, because it just seems like a very elvish decor scheme, especially with all of the inlay. So the boys are very impressed by this. Intel Harrier notices that a lot of the warrior elven figures are depicted wearing earrings, which just amuses him to no end. He's like, hey, the elves wore earrings. Tercel points out to Harrier that they probably still do wear earrings. It's not like the elves are extinct. After that, being very impressed by the temple, they join about a dozen people. It's Harrier, it's Tercel, a couple of tour guides, a cheerful family of centaurs. There is a troop of fawns, there is a family, there's a couple of little old ladies who just love to go on cave tours, and there is a group of students with a very officious teacher guiding them. We do get a little bit of funniness because during the cave tour, the teacher basically is mumbling under his breath the entire time and usually contradicting what the tour guides are saying. If you've ever been on a cave tour or any sort of a guided tour, that's pretty much what this is like. You know, you've got your tour guide that's pointing out different areas of interest. It's all very educational. Tercel and Harrier kind of have it in the back of their mind that they want to maybe slip away from the group and explore the caves on their own, see if there's anything that rings a bell to either of them. And we also find out that despite the fact that they are, not expecting to find anything, Tercel brought along pretty much all of his mage stuff, as Harrier calls it, and Harrier's actually wearing the sword that the wild mage Ronidia gave him. They don't have much else. They've got their money and stuff, but they did bring that stuff along just in case. Now, I don't know if you've ever gone on a guided tour. I've been on several of them, and Harrier and Tercel find out what I found out as a teenager. You can't really sneak away from tour guides. They're very, very sharp-eyed, and they catch the boys every time they kind of try to edge away and let them know that no, they can't go down these side passages. They're dangerous. They're not lit. They're a little bit disappointed because the guided tour that they get is quite sanitized. I mean, they walk along trails and pathways that were cut into the rock. Some were obviously man-made, but others are newer and they're well lit, marked out. The guides tell them about all of the battles that were fought there, and Tercel looks down a very interesting passage that is clearly marked "Do Not Enter." He asks the tour guide what's down there. The tour guide says, there's some really nasty drop-offs. That's why we have that section closed. After all, Kellen Night Mage might have been able to dance on the blade of a sword, but we don't expect our visitors to be able to. And then he guides Tercel firmly back to the others. The boys leave the cave, and Tercel asks Harrier if the cave seemed familiar. Harrier doesn't really want to reply to that because, yes, he did actually feel like that was the cave from their dream. Tercel says that he wants to go back in because he's pretty sure that that is the cave that he dreamed about. Tercel's like, Harrier's like, and what do you expect to do down there? Get lost? Die? Tercel doesn't think that that's going to happen. The boys get into yet another argument because, according to Harrier, Tercel never thinks, and Harrier never does, according to Tercel. Harrier does point out that he's been doing nothing but thinking since kindling when the magic came upon him, and he thinks that this is the right thing to do. They should sneak back in. Harrier reluctantly agrees that maybe they should, but how in the heck are they going to? I mean, they're going to close the doors. Even if there were another tour today, they weren't going to be able to sneak away because he saw Tercel trying to sneak away, and so did the guides. They're not sneaky enough. Tercel pokes Harrier in the ribs and is like, look, we've got a lot of experience at being sneaky. You remember that time that we snuck into the old foundry? Remember? Harrier doesn't really agree. He says, I don't even remember why we did that, but I do remember the dogs. Why in the name of the light would anybody guard an abandoned place? It's not like there's something that someone would want to steal. Tercel says that the point is They have snuck into places that they aren't supposed to go before. All he wants to do is look around the cave and see if it really is the one that they both dreamed about, and then they'll go back to the city. Harrier very reluctantly agrees, but he says that we should get something to eat while we're waiting for most of the people to leave the park. Tercel jokes about the fact that Harrier is always hungry. Harrier says, of course I'm always hungry, but, anyway, this could be our last meal. We should definitely go get one. Despite the fact that Harrier doesn't think they're going to be able to get back into the cave, they find it easier than they thought it was going to be to get in. They wait until the temple rings out the bells as if they were back in the city. First night bell rings, and most people are going to the Temple of the Light for the last service. The boys sneak into the cave, taking the precaution of renting a lantern from one of the lantern booths. They get in, they kind of admire the Temple of Light again, thinking that with it so brightly lit, at least people won't be able to see them as they try to sneak into the cave. And in they go. Now, Tercel, Harrier thinks, always makes these things seem so logical, and that's how they always get into trouble. But they get in, and there they go. Now, once they're inside, because they have not lit their lantern, Harrier points out that it would be kind of nice to see where they're going, so they light the lantern and start wandering through the cave. According to the tour guides earlier, there had been a village of Indarkins or a big battle in these caves, but nobody really remembered which one it was. They kind of look around and they don't think that humans actually built a lot of the stuff in there, so they're thinking it probably is the Indarkins. Tercel starts to recognize things from his dream and points out the way that they need to go. Harrier also is like, no, actually we need to go that way. Tercel gets into a little bit of a tiff saying, hey Harrier, I thought you said you didn't remember anything about your dream. And Harrier's like, I don't remember anything about my dream. I just know that that's the right way to go. In the end, they follow Harrier's lead into a corridor that leads into one of the drop-offs that they had been told about. Tercel wants to light the place up with mage light, but Harrier is like, no, we don't have any place to get rid of the glowy ball that's going to follow us around if you do that. They feel wind rushing up from down below them, and if the lantern weren't so well shielded, it would have gone out, and they are standing at the edge of a very long drop-off. It's narrow enough that they have to walk in single file, and they walk for a very long time till they get to the bottom of this drop-off. Thankfully, safely, they didn't fall in. That would be a very abrupt ending to the chapter and the book, which would make it hard for there to be a trilogy. Once they get to the bottom, they can't see the walls, they can't see the ceiling. Even with their lantern, all that they can see is kind of blackness. There's a sense of a lot of space, and Tercel's like, I'm gonna make a light. Harrier's like, Tercel overrules him and lights up the cave. Before his cold fire, his mage light, takes shape, the radiance spreads upwards from his hands like smoke, reaching the ceiling of the chamber, swirling through the stone like ink dripped into water, and spreads until Tercel doesn't just make a little ball of mage light, he lights up the whole dang cavern. Tercel's a little bit stunned by that and says, I didn't do that. Harrier doesn't completely believe him, but thankfully they can now see the cavern that is revealed. It's bigger than anything else that they have ever seen inside of the mountain, and without the glowing ceiling, they would not have been able to see it at all. If Harrier decided to walk across the cavern, which he doesn't think he was actually intending on doing, it would probably take an hour to get to the other side. So this cavern is ginormous. In the middle of the chamber, there's a lake of black glass that is perfectly round and gleaming like a mirror. Tercel is still trying to convince Harrier that he was just going to make a little ball of light, one that could follow him around. Harrier, he says, I think somebody's lit this place up before. Tercel sounds excited about that, as if he discovered some grand new fact, and that convinces Harrier that, yeah, Tercel's telling the truth. Not that Tercel would lie. Tercel wouldn't lie to anybody, which is always why he's getting in so much trouble. But, Tercel is probably right that some other high mage made the ceiling glow at some point in history. Harrier just wants to know if Tercel can make it stop. Tercel lets him know, no, he can't. But hey, at least we can see now, right, Harrier looks around the cavern, thinking that Tercel is always at his most irritating when he was trying to look on the bright side of a disaster. Side note, I think that is something that I do share with Tercel. I feel like part of me is a little bit more like Harrier. I do like the practical things in life. I like to have a plan. But I also do like to look at the bright side. Even if something seems like a disaster, you can usually recover from it, which is what I'm trying to do with the chapter recaps and hopefully doing a decent job. Back to the chapter. All right, Harrier looks around the cavern thinking about how Tercel is always irritating when he's looking at the bright side. But looking around, Harrier sees more of the stalactites and stalagmites, thinking that they look, and there's a series of holes in the walls. He thinks that they look like homes for bats or maybe birds. If the birds or bats were really, really big, Harrier wonders what they're for, but he probably doesn't really want to know. Unfortunately for Harrier and his extremely bad temper, it actually turns out to be a good thing that they can see the cavern, because without the cavern being lit up so brightly by Tercel, they would not have been able to find the exit that they needed. So they find the exit that they think leads to the next area of their dream, and they follow it. They can hear water running, which definitely makes Harrier think that this is the underground river that he heard in his dream. He's getting sort of an unsettled feeling. Tercel is also getting an unsettled feeling. It's kind of the feeling that he gets when he's drawing the glyphs and doing his magic right before he gets really, really weak. But, probably nothing, he thinks. He has no intention on telling Harrier that he's feeling a little bit ill, because if he did tell Harrier that, then Harrier would make them turn around and go back, and they'd probably be in at least a little bit of trouble, if not a whole lot of trouble, because, it's probably past the time when they should have turned their lamp in, because they've been walking down in this cave for hours at this point. Tercel wonders if there was another high mage maybe in the cave. Could that be what it's like? Maybe high mages can sense each other. He doesn't know. All he knows is he's feeling this really weird crawly sensation, and he's not going to tell Harrier about it. Harrier's just creeped out in general. Finally, they get to the end of this corridor, and that's kind of a relief, because the passageway kept getting narrower and narrower and narrower, and Harrier's shoulders, which are quite broad, are starting to scrape along the sides of the walls. And if Tercel wobbled at all, he would bang into the sides of the walls. He had been feeling okay before Tercel had, but now he's starting to get this kind of creepy feeling. He's starting to be right on the edge of panic, along with feeling sick like he has before when he does magic. And he didn't want to let Harrier know about it, but he's starting to feel trapped, buried alive, very creeped out. Thankfully, they get to the end of the passage and it widens out, which is awesome. It's obviously another huge cavern. All they could see was darkness and a little puddle of light that's right around their feet from the lantern. Unfortunately for them, the lantern's been getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and almost out of oil, and Tercell's going to have to cast Mage Light again. He hadn't liked the feeling that he got the last time when the whole ceiling had lit up, but things are starting to spiral out of control that is way beyond dangerous. Tercell kind of wishes that he would have agreed with Harrier that maybe they shouldn't have come down here. Harrier stops, lets off sort of a quacking noise as if he were trying to shout, but shout quietly, and he grabbed Tercell. Tercell looks where Harrier is looking and sees two huge globes of orange fire rising from the floor of the cave. And the crawly, unsettled feeling was so strong that Tercell felt as if he wanted to run, but he couldn't decide a direction. "Welcome," a deep voice said. "I've been waiting for you." And that is where that chapter ends. And yeah, I'm actually kind of curious. We're going to actually leave it there. Mostly because I want to know what you think is waiting in the bottom of the cave. I did put my own little baby clue up in the background. Not that it's a very good clue. It's probably way too obvious, but yeah, what do you guys think is waiting at the bottom of the cave? Also, I definitely think that Hazel had the right idea about this being a buddy cop movie. It also reminds me a little bit, when you read the boys bickering all the time, of a TV show that I did watch. I didn't get to watch it to the very end, but back when I still had TV access and cable. Shoot, I think I lived in Tennessee at that point, so that was like 20 years ago. But the boys remind me a little bit of Sam and Dean Winchester from Supernatural, and that kind of makes me smile. And if you start thinking about them that way, then I think you'll start to see a lot of parallels, because Harrier is a little bit like Dean. He's very practical, very hard-headed, a little bit of a temper, very gruff, but he also has his soft side and a heart of gold. Well, Tercell is a little bit like Sam. He's a little more of a dreamer. He trusts people a little bit more. I don't know if the boys in Supernatural changed too much. I think I only got to see like the first 4 or 5 seasons before I stopped watching it. I know it went on for like 14 seasons. But yeah, it's like, now that I've thought of them that way, and I literally just thought of them that way a minute ago, and now I can't unthink of them being that way. But yeah, now that I've thought of them that way, I can't unsee it. So yeah, I am very curious as to who you think has been waiting for our boys, Tercell and Harrier, down at the bottom of the cave. Let me know if you are more of a Harrier or if you're more of a Tercell. Like I said, I feel like I'm a fairly even mix between the two of them. I do try to look at the bright side of things, and I do try to just keep on keeping on. But like Harrier, I do like to have a plan. Not organized at all, and as you can see, the worst handwriting in the world. I might actually have to learn how to use, what would it be, like Word, MS Word or something? I don't know how good I'm going to be at that. So before I let you guys go, stupid fun fact about me, and I think the reason that I'm having not a hard time doing the chapter recaps, but I did have to laugh while I was trying to write notes for this. I managed to go through my entire school career. So 12 years, because I didn't go to college, I joined the Army instead, but 12 years of schooling, I managed to go through. And during those 12 years of schooling, I wrote one term paper and two book reports, and that was it. I don't know how I passed. I was the worst student ever. I do regret that, especially now that I'm basically trying to write a book report for these chapters that I'm doing so that I can like have notes and not miss any important points. But it is sort of ironic that the girl who never wrote a term paper or a book report is now trying to basically do that as a 50, oh wow, I'm going to be 52 this month. As a 50-ish year old lady, now I'm trying to learn to write a decent report. Life is funny. Anyway, along with being funny, life is also quite often beautiful, and I am going to, well, I'm not going to go for a walk because it's raining, but I am going to try and enjoy the rest of my day. And thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Thank you if you are subscribed. If you're not, you could always hit that subscribe button. Why not? You can watch me fumble my way through learning how to become a book reviewer, kind of, sort of, maybe in a very weird way. But regardless, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.